50% of outpatient antibiotic prescriptions might be completely inappropriate. The problem is that antibiotics are so overprescribed. Myself, when I was a kid, was prescribed antibiotics every time I went to the doctor's office. Doctors don't know about nutrition. They don't know how the chemicals that you put in your body every single day that come from food, that come from supplements, that come from just your general atmosphere and environment, they don't know how that interacts with the body. And with only 15 minutes and sometimes less to see a patient, they don't have the time to actually accurately diagnose what is really the root cause of a disease. So if you go in and you're sick, you got the sniffles, or you got a runny nose, or you got a little coughy cough, they're there to give you the Band-Aid, and the Band-Aid is antibiotics. Yo, what's up, a-holes? Thank you for tuning back into the Holistic A-Hole YouTube channel. Today, I want to talk to y'all about a new report that was released by the CDC talking about antibiotic-resistant bugs, superbugs that are out there just stomping all over humanity. Let's take a look at it right here. Bam, that's the report there. So basically what this report is, it's not very, dramatic, but it's basically reiterating this thing that we've known since the CDC first put out a report 6 years ago discussing this concept of superbugs. So basically what these superbugs are they are antibiotic resistant, I believe viruses, bacteria. I don't know if it's specifically viruses or fungi, but I believe it's bacteria, antibiotics, bacteria. So it's probably bacteria that are now completely resistant to antibiotics, which is a problem because a lot of people go to the doctor when they get sick. They get the sniffles, they get a little coughy cough, and then they run to the doctor to get antibiotics. Now, look, I am not trying to trivialize the importance of antibiotics for a lot of situations. A lot of people get real sick, a lot of people need antibiotics. Some people use antibiotics for things like SIBO, which has actually proven to be quite effective. And there are actual infections, that you need antibiotics for. But the problem is that so many antibiotics in this country are overprescribed, which we're going to talk about here a little bit later on in the video. But first, let's actually read this report and see what's going on. So the biggest threats and data written by, you see it right there, bam, the CDC. This ain't just no fake news, right? 2019 AR Threats Report. The CDC's antibiotic-resistant threats in the United States 2019 includes the latest national death and infection estimate that underscore the continued threat of antibiotic resistance in the U.S. According to the report, more than 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections occur in the U.S. each year, and more than 35,000 people die as a result. In addition, 223,900 cases of Clostridioides difficile occurred in 2017, and at least 12,800 people died in 2018. Look, I'm not required to know how to say all the different bacteria names. They're very difficult and are obnoxiously long and make no sense in the, and have no place in the U.S. idiot public school lexicon. But let's talk about what this article is actually saying here. 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections occur in the U.S. each year. That's a lot. 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections. That means people are getting sick. 2.8 million cases of this where antibiotics cannot be treated, cannot be used to treat the illness. So what does a person do in that case? Well, you know what they probably do? They probably let it pass, unless you're one of the 35,000 people who died as a result, which is also not good. If you're dying as a result of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, it's probably because you have wrecked your immune system. Now, granted, I understand people have, certain immunosuppressive diseases, people have genetic disorders, but 35,000 is not a representation of that. 35,000 means there's a lot of people who probably abused antibiotics, who probably had their system so run down, and I'm not victim shaming here, but at the same time, we got to be honest, right? We got to call it like it is. people are sick because their immune system can't handle these bacteria that your body is built to handle, okay? Now these bacteria have morphed into something that maybe the human body can't handle, at least to the point where antibiotics, the nuclear bomb that goes in and just wipes out all of your body's bacteria, most of which we know live in the gut. When those drugs go in and wipe out that bacteria, you're also wiping out your immune system. You're also wiping out a lot of beneficial bacteria and microbes that you need to actually make your immune system work correctly. 80% of your immune system lives on your gut. And when you go in and just nuclear bomb microbes and bacteria in your microbiome, you really throw your immune system out of whack. And as we know, the result of that can end up being things like autoimmune diseases, right? So it does make sense. And I would even think that this number is probably, if not higher yet, is going to go much higher, even probably in the next 5 to 10 years. Dedicated prevention and infection control efforts in the U.S. are working to reduce the number of infections and deaths caused by antibiotic-resistant germs, but the number of people facing antibiotic resistance is still too high. More action is needed to fully protect people. The CDC is concerned about rising resistant infections in the community, which can put more people at risk, make spread more difficult to identify and contain, and threaten the progress made to protect patients in healthcare. The emergence and spread of new forms of resistance remains a concern. And from here, what they do is they go on and list a number of these different antibiotic bacteria. I believe this is the list right here, and then you can kind of go down and see what these are. You know, some good ones, right? Clostridioides difficile, C. diff, right? That's a big one. We see C. diff a lot. Candida, a lot of people suffering with Candida. In fact, there's some supplements out there that are supposed to really help with Candida, but, you know, coming from a more holistic side, Candida is actually in your body. It's a natural mechanism of your body, and what it's meant to do, from what I understand, I could be wrong, but it is there to help your body essentially deal with toxic heavy metals. So sometimes if you have a Candida problem, you know, you also might have a problem with metals. Metals can come from a number of different things. You can get metals from food. You can get metals from personal care products. You can get metals from vaccines. So, you know, there's a lot of nuance to this stuff, right? We got good old gonorrhea. You know, so I would encourage you to go there and take a look. Now, why am I bringing this up? Okay, well, first of all, the report just came out today or yesterday, but the problem is that antibiotics are so overprescribed. Myself, when I was a kid, was prescribed antibiotics every time I went to the doctor's office. Every single time. I was sick constantly when I was a kid. When I was in middle school and early in high school, I was in and out of the doctor's office so much with sore throats, tonsillitis, and the doctor would just pump me full of antibiotics, amoxicillin. I was on amoxicillin at least half the year. And I'm sure down the road as an adult that had some kind of impact into health issues that I dealt with in my 20s and now in my 30s have been, you know, working to actually rectify. And I know what some of you are thinking. Eric, 30s, really? You don't have to lie. I thank you for that. Now, what am I talking about when we're talking about antibiotic overprescribing? Well, it's funny because the CDC has also written about antibiotic overprescribing here in this article, measuring outpatient antibiotic prescribing. Monitoring of outpatient antibiotic prescribing data is regularly conducted to analyze national and state antibiotic prescribing data in order to better understand trends in outpatient antibiotic prescribing, to identify where interventions to improve prescribing are most needed, and to measure progress. By measuring prescribing, blah, 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 who cares? Below are a number of statistics that help describe how antibiotics are currently being prescribed in outpatient settings in the United States and how these practices are contributing to the larger issue of antibiotic resistance. In 2014, 266 million courses of antibiotics are dispensed to outpatients in U.S. community pharmacies. This equates to more than 5 prescriptions written every year for every 6 people in the U.S. At least 30% of antibiotics prescribed in outpatient settings are unnecessary, meaning that no antibiotic was needed at all. Total inappropriate antibiotic use, inclusive of unnecessary use and inappropriate selection, dosing, and duration, may approach 50% of all outpatient antibiotic use. Wow! Do you understand how insane that is? 50% of outpatient antibiotic prescriptions might be completely inappropriate. That is really effed up. That is so effed up. You know what that is? And I hate to go on like this rant of doctor shaming, but the fact is that doctors don't have enough time to work with people. They're not equipped to work with people. They don't have the education to fully work with people. Am I disrespecting, 8 years of like a doctor's education in med school or whatever it is, 6 years, 10 years? Yes, I am. Because doctors don't know about nutrition. They don't know how the chemicals that you put in your body every single day that come from food, that come from supplements, that come from just your general atmosphere and environment, they don't know how that interacts with the body. They know chemistry, they know biology, but what they also know is pharmaceuticals. And with only 15 minutes and sometimes less to see a patient, they don't have the time to actually accurately diagnose what is really the root cause of a disease. So if you go in and you're sick, you got the sniffles, or you got a runny nose, or you got a little coughy cough, they're there to give you the Band-Aid, and the Band-Aid is antibiotics to the tune of, in this case, in 2014, 266 million times that was done. And you can only imagine in 2018, 2019, that number is probably a little bit higher. So that number, as a matter of fact, comes from this study that was done by the journal JAMA, and I'll bring it up here. The prevalence of, why don't we just move this over here a little bit for you to see? Okay. So this was written in JAMA. The prevalence of inappropriate antibiotics prescriptions among U.S. ambulatory care visits. So basically what they have here is they show you of the 184,032 sampled visits, 12.6 of the visits resulted in antibiotic prescriptions. Let's see what the top prescriptions were for. Well, coming in at number 1, sinusitis was the single diagnosis associated with the most antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 population, followed by suppurative otitis media, pharyngitis. And so the conclusions, in the United States in 2010, 2011, there was an estimated annual antibiotic prescription rate per 1,000 people of 506, but only an estimated 353 antibiotic prescriptions were likely appropriate, supporting the need for establishing a goal for outpatient stewardship. So, holy cow, more than 50% of the antibiotic prescriptions in this data set of 184,000 people, more than 50% of the prescriptions were completely inappropriate. In fact, it seems that out of every 1,000 people, only 353 antibiotic prescriptions were in fact appropriate. So somewhere there's a little bit of a gray area where maybe it was appropriate, but probably not. So what does that tell you, man? Well, it's interesting because when you look at the top 3 diagnoses where people were getting antibiotics, let's check them out right here. So first we got the top one, sinusitis. This comes from the Merck manual. They're all about getting people healthy and well. So you look here, sinusitis is, am I even saying right? Sinusitis is an inflammation of paranasal sinuses due to viral, bacterial, fungal infections or allergic reactions. The key word being here, inflammation. Let's look at the other ones. How about Otis media is a group of, what's that? Inflammatory diseases of the middle ear. And how about pharyngitis? Pharyngitis is inflammation of the back of the throat, known as the pharynx. So why am I highlighting the word inflammation in the top 3 diseases that get prescribed antibiotics? Well, it's funny because the word inflammation highlights the fact that these are diseases of inflammation. And we know that inflammation comes from the microbiome. The microbiome, i.e. your gut, is where inflammation comes from, because inflammation is controlled through your immune system. Your immune system lives on your gut. So if you don't take care of your gut, you're going to have problems with inflammation. Now, is this 100% of the time? Of course not. But if we're going to put our detective hats on, let's all take a moment and put our detective hats on, we can deduce that if we have a problem of overprescribing antibiotics to the point where now we have antibiotic-resistant bugs, superbugs, that are responsible for killing upwards of 35,000 people a year, well, we can make the assumption that a lot of the problems that we have with inflammatory issues, like the top 3 that get prescribed antibiotics, could most likely be mitigated by people taking care of their gut microbiome. Yes, am I saying is it that simple? Absolutely, I'm saying it's that simple. If you treat your gut well, you will help avoid illnesses that get prescribed antibiotics by doctors who don't have enough time to see you in the first place. I'm sorry, your doctor doesn't love you. You're a number. He doesn't care about you. He's getting game tickets from his pharmaceutical rep. He's getting dinners and cruises as long as he puts you on antibiotics. Or she. It's not just the dudes. Women doctors are guilty of this too. So what's my point with all this? My point is that knowing that we have a healthcare catastrophe on our hands right now, and we have Democratic candidates who want to make healthcare financed by you and me, the taxpayers, well, we better start getting our microbiomes in order so that we can A, stop having so many antibiotics, more than 50% worth that are prescribed in this country being completely prescribed inappropriately, and B, stop the proliferation of superbugs that are trying and in many cases successfully killing us. It's really that simple. Figure out the diet you need to take care of your gut. And I'm not saying just run to your local pharmacy and start picking up probiotics, because that's not the case either. Sometimes you got to dig deep. You got to dig deep into your psyche to figure out what your gut needs. You got to have a nice mix of plant foods, of animal foods, of foliage, of sustainably sourced meats. Get butyrate, short-chain fatty acids, resistant starch, fiber, fruits, vegetables. Get out of dairy, get out of sugar, get out of processed foods, and we'll stop the proliferation of superbugs. But I'd love to know what you think. Please let me know down in the comments what your thoughts on superbugs are and these recent reports by the CDC and all the things I talked about in this episode. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon right there so you can get notified every single time I put out a video. And please share the video with everyone you know, you love, especially those you think might be suffering from a superbug. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.